Rain pounded the trailer roof the night I found Nana Ruth, shivering in a threadbare chair, clutching cold tea like it was all she had left, abandoned by the brother I trusted to care for her. What kind of family steals from their own, hides a secret so dark it could shatter everything I thought I knew? One shaky whisper from her frail lips changed my life forever. There's something I never told you, Ellie. Stick with me through this storm of cinnamon and betrayal. Hit subscribe and help us reach 1,000 supporters to keep these stories alive. The rain came down in sheets that night, drumming against the roof of my old pickup as I pulled up to Travis's trailer. Cloverdale was 30 miles back, and the road out here twisted through pines that loomed like silent witnesses in the dark. I hadn't been to my brother's place in years, not since the last time he swore he'd get his act together, but something told me to check on Nana Ruth. Call it a hunch, or maybe just the ache of missing her voice lately. Either way, I wasn't ready for what I found. I stepped out, boots sinking into the muddy gravel, and the air hit me, sharp with wet earth and a faint whiff of rot. The trailer's screen door hung crooked, flapping in the wind like it'd given up long ago. Inside, it was worse. The carpet squished underfoot, soaked through, and the dim glow of a single bulb flickered over peeling walls. And there she was, Nana Ruth, hunched in a sagging armchair, her tiny frame swallowed by a frayed her hands. Those hands that once kneaded dough and wiped my tears, clutched a chipped mug of tea gone cold. Her silver hair hung loose, tangled like she hadn't brushed it in days. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. "Nana?" My voice cracked as I knelt beside her. She looked up, eyes cloudy but still hers, still the woman who'd raised me after Mom was gone. "Ellie?" she murmured, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You're here." That's all she said, but it was enough to break me. I glanced around. Empty soup cans on the counter, a sink piled with dishes, no sign of the warmth she deserved. Travis and June were supposed to be taking care of her. They'd promised me that much when I handed over her care 2 years ago. Too busy with the diner to see her every day. What a fool I'd been. I grabbed my phone and dialed Travis, pacing the cramped space as it rang. He picked up on the 4th try, voice thick with irritation. "What now, Ellen?" "Where are you?" I snapped. "Nana's sitting here alone, freezing in this dump you call a home." "We're doing our best," he shot back. "She's fine, back off." "Fine?" I nearly shouted. "This isn't fine. She's coming with me." He started to argue, but I hung up, my hands shaking. 54 years old and I still couldn't trust my own brother. Pete and I never had kids. Ruth's Corner, our little diner, was our baby instead. It filled the quiet spaces where a family might have been. But Nana? She was my everything. After Mom died when I was 8, it was Nana who stepped in. Her kitchen, my safe place. Her stories, my lullabies. I could still smell the cinnamon rolls she'd bake, hear her laugh as she dusted flour on my nose. No way was I leaving her here. I grabbed a duffel from my truck and started packing her things. Her nightgown, a faded photo of us from years back, her Bible with the cracked spine. She watched me, quiet, her breathing shallow. "Ellie," she said as I helped her up, her arm frail under my grip. I leaned close, steadying her. "There's something I never told you," she whispered, her voice trembling like the wind outside. "Something you need to know." I froze, rain dripping from my hood onto the floor. "What is it, Nana?" But her eyes fluttered, and she leaned into me, too tired to say more. My heart pounded as I guided her to the truck, the night swallowing us whole. Whatever she meant, it hung there between us, a secret heavier than the storm bearing down. The drive back to Cloverdale was quiet, save for the steady thump of the wipers and Nana's soft breathing beside me. Rain streaked the windshield, blurring the world outside, but I kept my eyes on the road, hands tight on the wheel. Nana Ruth leaned against the passenger window, her Afghan pulled close, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. 54 years of life had taught me plenty. How to flip pancakes for a packed diner, how to smile through a long shift, But nothing prepared me for this ache, this mix of love and fury churning in my gut. She'd whispered something back at the trailer, a secret dangling like a thread I couldn't quite grab. It gnawed at me, but she was too worn out to talk now. I'd wait. I had to. By the time we rolled into town, the neon sign for Ruth's Corner buzzed faintly through the mist. Pete was still there, locking up, his broad shoulders hunched against the damp. He took one look at Nana in the truck and didn't ask questions, just grabbed her bag and helped me ease her out. "Rough night?" he said, voice low. I nodded, too tired to explain. We got her upstairs to the little apartment above the diner, a snug space with creaky oak floors and a quilt I'd sewn years back. I tucked her into bed, the mattress sighing under her weight, and for a second, I could smell cinnamon, like the rolls she used to bake were still warm on the counter downstairs. "Sleep tight, Nana," I whispered, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. Her eyes fluttered shut, and I stood there, watching her chest rise and fall, wondering how I'd let it come to this. Morning came too fast. I was flipping bacon on the grill when the diner door swung open, bell jangling hard enough to turn heads. Travis stormed in, June trailing behind him, her lips pursed tight. The breakfast crowd, old-timers sipping coffee, a few truckers on their way through, went quiet, sensing trouble. "What the hell, Ellen?" Travis barked, his work boots scuffing the linoleum. "You can't just take her like that." I set the spatula down, wiping my hands on my apron. "I can when you leave her in a pigsty," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She's not a burden you can dump." June crossed her arms, her cheap perfume cutting through the grease and coffee. "She's our responsibility, not yours. You're meddling." "Neglect isn't care," I shot back, stepping closer. "Where's her money, Travis? The savings she had, what did you do with it?" He flinched just for a second, then squared his shoulders. "We borrowed it. Debts piled up. Business went south." She said it was fine. I laughed, sharp and bitter. "Nana would have given you her last dime if you asked, but she'd never sign off on this." "You're lying." "She's old, Ellen," June cut in. "She doesn't know what she wants half the time." That did it. I pointed at the door. "Get out. Both of you. She's staying with me." Travis glared, but they left, muttering as the bell chimed behind them. The regulars went back to their eggs, but I could feel their eyes on me, soft with pity or maybe respect. I didn't care. I just wanted Nana safe. Later, after the lunch rush, I sat with her upstairs. She was awake, propped against pillows, her hands folded in her lap. I took her brush, old, wooden, the one she'd used on my hair as a kid, and started working through the tangles. "Remember the kitchen on Maple Street?" I said, voice soft. "You'd let me roll dough even when I made a mess. Said it was the trying that mattered." She smiled, faint but real. "Hand steady, heart strong. That's how we rise, Ellie." Her words pulled me back. 10 years old, flour on my cheeks, her laugh filling the room. But then her smile faded. "I made choices," she said almost to herself. "For you kids. Hard ones." I stopped brushing. "What choices, Nana?" She didn't answer, just stared out the window at the pines bending in the wind. I wanted to press her, but she looked so fragile, like one push might break her. I set the brush down and kissed her forehead, promising myself I'd get the truth soon. That night, Pete locked up while I scrubbed the grill. He paused by the back door, head tilted. "Heard Travis outside earlier," he said, talking to June. "Said if you dig too deep, you'll hate them both." I froze, rag dripping in my hand. "Dig into what?" Pete shrugged, but his eyes were worried. No, hun. Just thought you should hear it." I stared at the dark beyond the glass, Travis's words looping in my head. What had they done? And why did it feel like Nana knew more than she was letting on? The rain kept falling, steady and cold, and I couldn't shake the sense that something bigger was coming, something I wasn't ready for. The diner felt different that next evening, like the air itself was holding its breath. I'd closed early, flipped the sign to "Sorry, we're closed," and set up a table in the middle. 4 chairs, a pot of coffee, and a plate of day-old biscuits nobody touched. Travis and June showed up right on time, him in a flannel that smelled like cigarette smoke, her with that same pinched look she'd worn since they got hitched. Nana Ruth sat across from me, bundled in a sweater I'd dug out of storage, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped a mug. Pete offered to stay, but I'd waved him off. This was between us, family, or whatever was left of it. I didn't waste time. "Let's cut the bull," I said, leaning forward, elbows on the table. "Nana's money, her savings. You said she gave it to you. I want the truth, Travis. All of it." He shifted in his seat, eyes darting to June. "I told you business went bad. We borrowed it. She was fine with it." "Fine with it?" My voice rose, sharp enough to echo off the diner walls. "She's living in a trailer with no heat, eating cold soup out of a can, and you're telling me she was fine? You expect me to believe that?" June leaned in, nails tapping the table. "You don't get it, Ellen. We needed it. She wanted to help." "Help?" I laughed, but it came out raw, jagged. "She raised me, raised us, on nothing but grit and love. She'd have given you her last penny if you'd asked, but she'd never let herself rot like that. You took it. Admit it." Travis's jaw tightened, and for a second I thought he'd bolt, but then he slumped, rubbing a hand over his face. "Okay, yeah. We took it. The trucking gig tanked, debts piled up. We didn't have a choice." "Didn't have a choice." I stood, chair scraping loud against the floor. "You had a choice to call me, to say, 'Hey Ellen, we're drowning, help us figure this out.' Instead, you drained her dry and left her there like she didn't matter." "She matters?" Travis snapped, slamming a fist on the table. The coffee sloshed and Nana flinched. "You think I wanted this? We were going to pay her back. Still are." "When?" I fired back. "When she's gone? When it's too late?" The room went still, the only sound the hum of the fridge in the back. I looked at Nana, expecting her to stay quiet like always, to let us fight it out, but she set her mug down, slow and deliberate, and when she spoke, her voice was thin but steady, cutting through the mess like a knife. "I told them to take it, Ellie." I turned, heart dropping. "What?" Her eyes met mine, cloudy but fierce. "I told them to take the money, to keep you safe." "Safe?" I sank back into my chair, the word heavy in my mouth. "Safe from what, Nana?" She took a shaky breath, hands folding tight in her lap. "Your mama didn't just die in that crash, honey. Travis was driving, drunk. He was 19, reckless, and I found him at the wreck, sobbing over her. Cops could have locked him up, but I couldn't lose you both. I paid him to leave town, used every dime I had back then. When he came back years later, broke and begging, I gave him more, to keep it buried, to keep you from knowing." The world tilted. I stared at her, then at Travis, his face gone pale, eyes fixed on the floor. June muttered something, but it didn't register. My mom, her laugh, her red scarf, the way she'd hum off-key, flashed through me, and then the crash I'd buried deep. The one I'd been told was an accident. "You?" I whispered, turning to Travis. "You killed her?" "It wasn't like that," he choked out. "I didn't mean it was dark, the road was slick." "Stop." I held up a hand, my voice breaking. "Just stop." He stood, chair clattering, and bolted for the door. June scrambled after him, leaving silence in their wake. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Nana reached for my hand, her fingers cold against mine. "I'm sorry, Ellie," she said, tears pooling in her eyes. "I thought I was protecting you." Protecting me? The words burned. I pulled away, stumbling to the counter where an old photo hung. Mom and me, grinning at a fair, Nana's shadow just out of frame. All these years I'd seen her smile in that picture, and missed the truth behind it. Now it stared back at me, sharp as glass. Nana's voice came again, softer now. "There's one more thing. In my recipe box. You need to see it." I turned, her words hanging there, heavy with something I couldn't name. The diner felt too small, the walls pressing in, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat, loud and unsteady, drowning out the rain. Rain tapped the diner windows like a restless finger, steady and cold, as I stood there, staring at Nana Ruth across the empty room. Her words from last night still echoed. Travis driving, Mom dying, her silence bought with every dollar she'd scraped together. I hadn't slept. Couldn't. The photo of Mom on the counter watched me, her smile frozen in time, and I kept seeing it twist into something else. Grief, betrayal, a question I'd never get to ask. Nana sat in her chair now, wrapped in that same sweater, looking older than she ever had. I wanted to be angry, to yell at her for hiding it all, but when I opened my mouth, nothing came out, just a hollow ache where the fight should have been. I turned away, needing something to do, and my eyes landed on her recipe box, a scratched tin thing, dented from years of use. She'd said it held one more secret, and part of me wanted to leave it shut, to let the past stay buried. But my hands moved anyway, pulling it from the shelf, the lid creaking as I opened it. Inside were her cards, sloppy handwriting on faded paper, cinnamon rolls, cornbread, peach cobbler, all the tastes of my childhood. I sifted through them, fingers brushing ink, until I found it, a folded note tucked in the back, her shaky scrawl spelling my name, Ellie. I unfolded it, heart thudding. "Ellie," it read. "I kept him away so you could grow. I lost my girl. Couldn't lose you too. Forgive him if you can. I couldn't." That was it, short and plain, but it hit me like a freight train. I sank onto a stool, the note trembling in my hands, and the tears came fast, hot, messy, spilling onto the counter. All those years, she'd carried this alone, shielding me from a truth she thought would break me. I saw her again, kneeling by my bed after Mom was gone, her hand steady as she tucked me in, whispering I'd be okay. She'd been my wall, my roots, and I'd never known the cost. The diner was quiet that morning, just the hum of the coffee maker and the rain outside. I left it closed, couldn't face the regulars yet, and stayed upstairs with Nana. She was weaker now, her breathing shallow, but she smiled when I sat beside her. I brushed her hair again, the old wooden brush smooth in my grip, and tried to find words. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked finally, voice low. She looked at me, eyes soft. "You were my light, Ellie. I couldn't let him dim it." "But he's my brother," I said, the ache twisting deeper. "I deserved to know." "Maybe," she whispered, "but I chose love over truth. Right or wrong, it's what I had left to give." I didn't have an answer for that. Instead, I went downstairs and started baking her cinnamon rolls, the recipe I knew by heart. The dough came together under my hands, soft and warm, and the scent filled the air, sweet and sharp. It was like she was there with me, her laugh in the rustle of the oven, her touch in every pinch of spice. When they were done, I brought one up to her, still steaming, and she took a small bite, eyes closing like she was tasting home. "Perfect," she murmured, and I held her hand, feeling the years between us melt away. Later, I called Travis. The phone rang twice before he picked up, voice rough. "What now?" "I know everything," I said, calm as I could manage. "Mom, the crash, what Nana did. Stay away from us. We're done." "Ellen, No," I cut him off. "You don't get to explain, not anymore." I hung up before he could say more, and the silence that followed felt clean, like a weight lifting. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but a line drawn. I'd made my peace with that. By evening, the rain had slowed and a few regulars trickled in when I reopened. They didn't ask about the closed sign, just ate the rolls and swapped stories about Nana Ruth. "She patched my coat once," old Mr. Hensley said, chuckling. Tough as nails, that woman. I smiled, letting their voices wrap around me, a patchwork of her life I hadn't seen before. Nana watched from her chair by the window, frail but present, and I thought maybe this was enough. Her here, the diner humming, the past settling into something I could carry. Pete came in late after locking the shed out back. He slid onto a stool, grease on his hands, and nodded toward the recipe box still open on the counter. "Found something in there while you were upstairs," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. It was yellowed, sealed, my name scrawled across it in a hand I didn't recognize. Travis's, maybe? Was tucked under the bottom flap, he added, sliding it to me. I stared at it, fingers hovering. Another secret? Another crack in the life I thought I knew? Nana's eyes were closed now, her breathing slow, and the envelope sat there, heavy as a stone, waiting for me to decide. The envelope sat on the counter all evening, its edges curling like it'd been waiting years to be found. Pete wiped down tables while I stared at it, my name scrawled in Travis's messy hand. A handwriting I hadn't seen since he'd scribbled me a note in high school, begging for $5 to sneak into a movie. The diner was quiet now, just the tick of the clock and Nana's soft snores from her chair by the window. I wanted to toss it, let it stay sealed with the rest of the mess he'd left behind, but my fingers itched, and before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed a butter knife and slid it open. Inside was a single sheet folded tight, and a small photo fluttered out, landing face up on the counter. It was Mom, young, maybe 20, laughing in a sundress, her hair wild in the wind. Nana stood beside her, arms crossed, a grin tugging at her lips. I hadn't seen this one before, and the sight of them together, happy, whole, clawed at me. I unfolded the letter, Travis's words spilling out in black ink. "Ellen," it started. "I'm sorry. I know that's nothing now, but I am. Mom was right. Families who shows up, I didn't. Never knew how. This was in her stuff when we moved her. Thought you should have it." That was it. No excuses, no pleas, just a jagged little shard of regret. I pressed the photo to my chest, tears blurring the edges. All day I'd been rolling dough. Nana's cinnamon rolls again, kneading out the ache, and now it spilled over. I looked at my hands, dusted with flour, and saw hers. Steady, strong, shaping me when I didn't even know it. Travis hadn't written much, but he didn't need to. I'd spent years hating him, and maybe I still did, but this was something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in the wall I'd built, letting a sliver of light through. That night, Nana slipped away. I'd stepped upstairs to check on her after closing, the rolls still warm downstairs, and found her still in her chair, head tilted back, a faint smile on her lips. Her hands were folded, peaceful, like she'd just drifted off mid-story. I knelt beside her, whispering, "You're home now," and the tears came quiet this time, not the storm I'd expected. Pete found me there, wrapped his arms around me, and we sat with her until the stars faded into dawn. She'd given me everything, her love, her secrets, her strength, and left me standing taller than I'd ever known. The memorial was a week later, right there in Ruth's corner. I opened the doors wide, let the town pour in. Old-timers in flannel, kids with sticky fingers, truckers who'd known her name. I baked trays of her rolls, the scent weaving through the chatter, and folks ate slow, swapping tales. "She fixed my bike once," a guy named Cal said, grinning. "Told me to quit whining and ride." Mrs. Perry left a note by the register. "Ruth taught us all." I read it over and over, feeling her in every word, every laugh that bounced off the walls. She wasn't just mine. She'd been theirs too, a thread tying us together. Months later, I hung that photo by the register. Mom and Nana, caught mid-joy, right where I could see them every day. The diner hummed like always, coffee brewing, plates clattering, voices rising and falling. I stood behind the counter, apron tied tight, and rolled out dough for the morning rush. The rhythm of it settled me. Knead, fold, press, like her hands guiding mine one last time. "You were enough, Nana," I whispered, the words slipping out soft and sure. She'd carried us through the dark, pieced us back together with nothing but love and a little cinnamon. And now, in the warm buzz of this place, I wasn't alone. She was still here, in the flower on my fingers, the stories in the air, the life she'd built for me to keep. I looked out at the faces, regulars, friends, family in the truest sense, and smiled. Travis was gone, maybe for good, but what he'd left behind wasn't hate. It was a lesson Nana had lived every day. Family's not blood. It's who stays. Who shows up when the rain's pouring down. I brushed a tear away, tucked the photo's edge straight, and turned back to the dough. The oven beeped, the rolls rose golden, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole.